Well, exactly 2 weeks ago at this very hour, I had seen enough of what was happening to Matt Gaetz's nomination for Attorney General in the United States Senate to declare with confidence right here that Matt Gaetz would not, could not be confirmed, wasn't going to happen. And just 2 days later, Donald Trump then withdrew Matt Gaetz's nomination for Attorney General. And tonight, Pete Hegseth's confirmation for Secretary of Defense has now hit the same wall in the United States Senate that blocked the Gaetz nomination. Pete Hegseth is not going to be confirmed for Secretary of Defense. It's all over. If we're on the same schedule we were on with the Matt Gaetz nomination, that means Donald Trump will give up on Pete Hegseth on Thursday. As I explained here last night, it only takes one Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee to kill the Hegseth nomination in that committee. I also pointed out that that committee has 2 Republican women who will be the first senators to vote on the Hegseth nomination in that committee. And NBC News is now reporting that one of those women is now planning to make that a very, very difficult confirmation hearing for Pete Hegseth if he somehow dares to show up for that 2 months from now. NBC News broke the news today of the number of Senate Republicans who are not supporting the Hegseth nomination. It only takes 4 Senate Republicans added to all the Democrats to defeat any Republican nomination on the Senate floor in the full Senate vote. And NBC News is reporting as many as 6 Senate Republicans, perhaps more, are currently not comfortable supporting Hegseth's bid to lead the Pentagon as new revelations about the former Fox News anchor's past continue to be made public. And you can be absolutely sure that there will be no information about Pete Hegseth coming out that will make any senators more comfortable in supporting his nomination. NBC News reports Senator Joni Ernst, Republican of Iowa, who sits on the Armed Services Committee, would not commit to supporting Hegseth's nomination and said she planned to grill the former cable news host about news accounts of his alleged alcohol abuse, mistreatment of women, and financial mismanagement. We're just going to have a really frank and thorough conversation, Ernst said of Hegseth's nomination process. Pete Hegseth cannot survive a really frank and thorough conversation. That is Republican Senator Joni Ernst's way of saying Hegseth doesn't have a chance. It may be that the only thing we're waiting for is for Donald Trump to decide who his next choice for Secretary of Defense will be before he gets rid of Pete Hegseth. Last night, in an interview with Rachel Maddow, Jane Mayer, who delivered career-ending reporting for The New Yorker about Pete Hegseth career-ending reporting for The New Yorker on Sunday about his public drunkenness and abuse of women, said there is probably much more to come.
It's been almost a day since this story came out, and my phone has been ringing off the hook. I have been hearing from many more people who worked with Pete Hegseth who have come out of the woodwork to say they, too, have stories along the same lines.
They, too, have stories along the same lines. Some of those people who worked with Pete Hegseth came out of the woodwork to tell NBC News about just how drunk you can be hosting a Fox morning show. NBC News reports Pete Hegseth, President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Defense Secretary, drank in ways that concerned his colleagues at Fox News, according to 10 current and former Fox employees who spoke with NBC News. 2 of those people said that on more than a dozen occasions during Hegseth's time as a co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend, which began in 2017, they smelled alcohol on him before he went on air. Those same 2 people, plus another, said that during his time there, he appeared on television after they'd heard him talk about being hungover as he was getting ready or on set. One of the sources said they smelled alcohol on him as recently as last month and heard him complain about being hungover this fall. Everyone would be talking about it behind the scenes before he went on the air. One of the former Fox employees said. 3 current employees said that his drinking remained a concern up until Trump announced him as his choice to run the Pentagon, at which point Hegseth left Fox. 1 current and 2 former Fox employees said they felt like they needed to babysit Hegseth due to his drinking and late nights. We'd have to call him to make sure he didn't oversleep because we knew he'd be out partying the night before, one of them said. Hegseth drank heavily at some social events with Fox News colleagues as well, according to 2 former employees, with one of the former colleagues saying he would get absolutely wasted. For the sake of national security, I really hope he has stopped drinking, one of the former Fox employees said. He should not be Secretary of Defense, another former Fox employee said. His drinking should be disqualified. Absolutely wasted is now an accurate 2-word description of Pete Hegseth's nomination to be Secretary of Defense. Fox did not respond to NBC News requests for comments. A spokesperson for the Trump transition team added credibility to the allegations by calling the allegations, quote, completely unfounded and false. Every single spokesperson who has ever worked for Donald Trump has repeatedly engaged in public lying. So the presumption about any statement from a Trump spokesperson should be that it is a lie. Every Trump spokesperson, including Donald Trump, has earned that presumption. Pete Hegseth's lawyer, who is far less comfortable with public lying, declined to comment. Here is Pete Hegseth today, going door to door, desperately trying to talk to senators in the Russell Senate office building, but refusing to have that really frank and thorough conversation that Senator Joni Ernst wants to have with him.
Eddie, can you respond to any of these allegations of misconduct?
Are senators concerned at all about drinking? There's a new report saying that you were seen drinking while you were doing the work.
Folks, we've had a good set of meetings today with senators. Talk about Secretary Designate's vision, what the president wants at the Department of Defense, part of an integrated strategy in the next term. And we'll continue to have conversations with senators as they deal with their questions.
Do you ever come to the work
Senators asking you about any of these allegations.
Have you heard from Senator Wicker at all about the reports?
Every one of those flags that he walked by were flags in front of the door of a United States senator whose door was closed to Pete Hegseth. That is an awful long way to walk in the Russell Senate office building between meetings with senators who would normally be very eager to speak to a nominee for Secretary of Defense. And I mean senators from both parties. And remember, on that walk 2 weeks ago today, when Matt Gaetz was doing that walk, J.D. Vance was proudly and smilingly walking at Matt Gaetz's side, walking around the Senate with him. It was a parade of clowns. They were full of smiles and confidence publicly, but as I said that night, they were obviously the walking dead in the United States Senate that day. And if you're wondering just how dead the Hegseth nomination is, today, J.D. Vance was no Senator J.D. Vance. Remember, he has one of those offices in one of those buildings. Senator J.D. Vance was nowhere to be seen when Pete Hegseth became the dead man walking through the Senate hallways.